The universe appears to be 13.8 billion years old. Earth is like 4.5 billion years old. In another 500 million years or so, the sun will expand and probably evaporate the oceans and make life impossible on Earth, which means that if it had taken consciousness 10% longer to evolve, it would never have evolved at all. Just 10% longer. And I wonder how many dead one-planet civilizations there are out there in the cosmos that never made it to the other planet and ultimately extinguished themselves or were destroyed by external factors. Probably a few. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you've ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. We could see, anywhere from 5 to 10%, maybe more, of the landmass absorbed by water. About a third of humanity lives right on the coastline. So we'd be talking about maybe 2 billion people being displaced, and their homes being destroyed and their countries being gone. Even when you've got a situation where virtually every scientist on Earth agrees that this is, that global warming is real, that adding billions of tons of carbon to the atmosphere and oceans is a bad idea, then you have a few percent of who dissent, and then the way that it is presented to the public is not that 97 or 98% of scientists think what we're doing is crazy, but simply that scientists disagree. Now scientists disagree about everything. Okay, you will not find 100% of scientists who agree about anything. But this is a very disingenuous argument. I mean, there's definitely, there are many important issues in the world. This is not the only important issue, but it is, I think, the thing that will have the biggest negative effect on humanity if we do not address it. In general terms, what is needed to address the climate crisis? And this is the thing that, if we do, what actions can we take that will accelerate the transition out of the fossil fuel era? So there's a certain amount of carbon that is circulating through the environment. So it's going into the air, being absorbed by, and then getting absorbed by plants and animals, and then going back into the air. And this carbon is just circulating on the surface. And this is fine, and it's been doing that for millions, hundreds of millions of years. The thing that's changed is that we've added something to the mix. So this is what I would call the sort of the turd in the punch bowl. So we added all this extra carbon to the carbon cycle, and the net result is that the carbon in the ocean's atmosphere is growing over time. It's much more than can be absorbed by the ecosystem. It's really quite simple. We're taking billions of tons of carbon that's been buried for hundreds of millions of years, and is not part of the carbon cycle, taking it from deep underground and adding it to the carbon cycle. Carbon parts per million has really been bouncing around the 300 level for around 10 million years. And then in the last few hundred years, it went into a vertical climb. This is the essence of the problem. This is very unusual, and a very, very extreme threat, as you can see from this rate of growth. Then this is accompanied by a temperature increase, as one would expect. And this temperature increase, if people talk about 2 degrees or 3 degrees, it's important to appreciate just how sensitive the climate actually is to temperature. And it's important to look at it in terms of absolute temperature, not in degrees Celsius relative to 0. We need to say, what is the temperature change relative to absolute 0? That's how the universe thinks about temperature. It's how physics thinks about temperature. it's relative to absolute zero. So for small changes result in huge effects. So New York City under ice would be -5 degrees. New York City underwater would be +5 degrees. But looked at as a percentage relative to absolute zero, it's only a ±2% change. The sensitivity of the climate is extremely high. We've amplified this sensitivity by building our cities right on the coastline, and most people live very close to the ocean. There are some countries, of course, that are very low-lying and would be completely underwater in a climate crisis. So we've essentially designed civilization to be super sensitive to climate change. The important thing to appreciate is that we are going to exit the fossil fuels era. So it is inevitable that we will exit the fossil fuels era, because at a certain point we'll simply run out of carbon to mine and burn. So the question is really, when do we exit the era, not if. The goal is to exit the era as quickly as possible. That means we need to move from the old goal, with the pre-industrial goal, which was to move from chopping down forests and killing lots of whales. The old goal was to move from chopping wood and killing whales to fossil fuels, which actually, in that context, was a good thing. But the new goal is to move to a sustainable energy future. And we want to use things like hydro, solar, wind, geothermal. Nuclear is also a good option in places like France, which aren't subject to natural disasters. And we want to use energy sources that will be good for 1 billion years. So how do we accelerate this transition away from fossil fuels to a sustainable era? And what happens if we don't? So if we wait and if we delay the change, the best case is simply delaying that inevitable transition to sustainable energy. So this is the best case if we don't take action now. At the risk of being repetitive, there's going to be no choice in the long term to move to sustainable energy. It's tautological. We have to have sustainable energy, or we'll simply run out of the other one. So the only thing we gain by slowing down the transition is just slowing it down. It doesn't make it not occur. It just slows it down. The worst case, however, is more displacement and destruction than all the wars in history combined. Okay, these are the best worst case scenarios. So then, we have about 3% of scientists that believe in the best case, and about 97% that believe in the worst case. This is why I call it the dumbest experiment in history. Like, why would you do this? The issue we have right now is that the rules fundamentally favor the bad outcome. So when you're fighting for the good outcome and it's an uphill battle, it's just slower. So with respect to climate change, it's just critical that the government, and the government is the setter of rules. The government decides what rules companies will play by. And if we currently have a system which massively incents bad behavior. So even if most people don't do the bad behavior, some people will still do the bad behavior. The best thing to do is just to either put a penalty on carbon CO2 creation, or next best, not as good, is to provide an incentive for electric vehicles and for sustainable energy generation. The greater the incentive, the faster the good behavior will happen. Now, of course, the great irony here is that, of course, in the long term, we will have to go to sustainable energy generation and sustainable transport, because we will simply run out of hydrocarbons to burn. So we know with certainty that this is the end point. The question is just, do you want to get there? How much CO2 do you want to put into the atmosphere before we get there? Like, we can take it all out and put it in the atmosphere. I think that would be quite bad. Or we could put a small incremental amount or a large incremental amount. It's just entirely dependent upon how you set the economics of carbon-producing actions versus non-carbon-producing actions. So it's somewhat of a continuum. The greater the incentive, the better. I mean, for a lot of countries, they're sort of aimed at around a 10% incentive for electric vehicles. Hopefully, anything more than nothing would be good. So, I mean, today the challenge is in terms of millions of people, but in the future, based on what the scientific consensus is, the problem will be in hundreds of millions and much more severe. So I think it's very important that we take action today to recognize that we are making a very significant change to the chemical constituency of the atmosphere and the oceans, and one that is almost impossible to reverse. I think, when we look back on these days in the future, we want to be able to say that we did the actions that were right, the actions that were important, because I think it's very difficult to say, if you go, say, 20, 30, 40 years in the future, what do you say to your kids or your grandkids? It's not as though, it's like the scientists all say that these bad things are going to happen. It's like 97%. So say, well, to your grandkids, your kids, well, did nobody tell you? No, it's like, no, everyone was telling us. Okay, so why didn't you do anything? Based on the projections that we're seeing right now, and these are I'd say arguably best case projections, we're going to see significant rises in temperature and sea level. So I think we should take action. About a third of humanity lives right on the coastline. So we'd be talking about maybe 2 billion people being displaced, and their homes being destroyed and their countries being gone.